DuckTales always has been one of my favorite shows. It had great adventures and a lot of heart. So when they announced a reboot, I was a bit conflicted. Do I want modern Disney to touch my precious childhood memories? And then I realized how stupid this question is, considering that some of my favorite shows in recent memory are in fact Disney shows. Gravity Falls, Wonder Over Yonder, and Star Wars: Forces of Evil are easily some of my favorite cartoons of all time. And if the DuckTales reboot turns out only half as good as these shows, I should be happy. But does the reboot deliver, or is it a disappointment?
Tricky. Even the nostalgia critic already reviewed it. Everyone and their mother knows that this reboot is good.
God damn it, we are slow. Well, we're gonna review it anyway. So, the DuckTales reboot. What a strange mix. It feels different and familiar at the same time, being more a combination of the old school show and Disney's Duck comics, which are especially popular around here in Europe. And most importantly, this time they keep Donald around. He barely appeared in the original show. I can't be the only one who was bothered by that.
In the old cartoon, as we already mentioned, he was away on Navy duty. In the comics, he switched between jobs. Sometimes he worked in a factory, sometimes he worked for a newspaper, and here we see he is unemployed. Insert a modern economic jokes here.
I remember it wasn't uncommon for Donald to be unemployed in the comics, which is why Scrooge usually forced his nephew to work for him. In any case, I really like how Donald is portrayed as a well-meaning father figure for these three while also keeping his classic bad luck. Really, that scene with the stapler feels like it could belong into a classic cartoon. But I'm even more surprised that this show goes for portraying him as a seasoned adventurer, when even the comics usually prefer to portray him as a good-for-nothing fool. When he isn't dressed up as a local Batman parody in the Italian comics, that is. I wonder if that will make it into the show.
In any case, as the usual babysitter for the nephews seems to have gone to nowhere, Kansas, Donald sees no other choice than to seek out his estranged Uncle Scrooge, who at this time is on a meeting with his board of vulture directors. I bet 5 bits at least one of them will turn out to be a member of Fowl. It seems that Scrooge's life has gone a bit stale. He seems bored and grouchy most of the time, and any comment that he's past his prime really gets to him. Also, Lunchpad in this incarnation starts off as his driver, and not a pilot. Now, one would question why Scrooge would hire him, since, well, he's Lunchpad, which means even if he is cheap, the car insurance must be killing. Who knows, we might actually learn some of their history. Anyway, when Scrooge and Donald finally meet, the tension is thick enough you can carve it for Thanksgiving.
That's one way to put it. Interestingly enough, while this Scrooge feels very familiar, he is actually much different from his usual portrayal. They really play down his greed. Sure, he is still a bit cheap, but the few times it pops up, it is played for laughs. In the original show, greed was the motivation for most of his adventures and actions. This version, on the other paw, is more motivated by his lust for adventure. He is bored by his current lifestyle as a businessman, something the original seemingly had no problem with. He doesn't really want to find Atlantis to find the treasure. He only wants to prove that he still got it.
I completely agree. While Scrooge's most well-known trait is his greed/stinginess, he also has a lot of pride to him. Not only is he technically the last to have the name McDuck, but he also made all his money, all on his own, fair and square, and having that fit diminished weighs on him. But at this point we should introduce the updated take on Mrs. Bickley, who apparently has done some intense lifting. Also, she seems to be the only employee of the McDuck Manor, meaning she has a bit more history with Scrooge, as well as there is no Duckworth. Some people say that this guy is supposed to be Duckworth, since the staff did say that all the characters we care about will be making a return, some in new roles. Bickley also has a bit more of dry humor to her, as well as she is not above telling Scrooge off, especially when he treats her as his secretary. And then there's probably the biggest change to the series, Webby. And Oh my goodness, we haven't gotten such an improvement on a character since Kristen Wiig became Lola Bunny.
Grey, do you really want to risk an assault from Lola Bunny fans? Also, we are talking about Disney now and not Warner Brothers.
I don't care, you may throw carrots or whatever at me, and I'll keep my opinion. In fact, expect a separate video on this topic at some point. Now, a lot of people said that she's out like Mabel Pines, to which I don't disagree. However, I'd say it's mostly true to some superficial traits, like her being more energetic, random, and having a grappling hook. However, as it was pointed out by others, they are different by the fact of her social awkwardness and being rather lonely alongside few other things. And while we're making comparisons, her pining for adventure reminds me more of Dipper rather than Mabel. Personally, I believe they belong in the same category of characters, which is a bit hard to pinpoint. Personally, I would describe it as quirky overdrive, and it would include such characters as Mabel, Webby, Pinkie Pie, Bugs Bunny, as well as a few others.
I would call it a mostly pink category, but yeah, I could imagine that she was somewhat inspired by Mabel, but I think it's a bit unfair to call her a Mabel clone. But then there are of course our chief troublemakers, Huey, Dewey and Louie, and I like where they are going with them. They are usually portrayed as rather interchangeable, with the only trait to tell them apart being their colors. Now, this is not the first time Disney tried to differentiate these three, but last time it failed by being too 90s. Huey is arguably the one who is the closest to their classic portrayal, resourceful and an overall nice guy. He is also the only one who was allowed to keep his hat. Dewey is much more hot-headed and doesn't think everything through, which quite contrasts his Quack Pack version, who was usually portrayed as a smart guy. Louie is called the evil triplet by the others. We will have to wait and see if that holds true, but he indeed shows some negative character traits. Always laid back and a bit lazy and seemingly a bit greedy. These three balance each other out pretty well. Perhaps one of my favorite scenes so far is when Dewey opens the door with a bag of marbles using brute force. A clever in-joke on how they could do pretty much everything with some marbles in the original.
I fully agree. Not only does it give them much needed individuality, but it also opens the opportunity for each of them to have personal arcs and different ways to grow.
On the villain side we get a ghost, a headless horse, and a freaking dragon that is really into gold. All three are pretty entertaining in their own right, and that's not even including the Deus Excalibur. I really like that name. In any case, there isn't much to talk about concerning them, but it is really fun to see how Scrooge takes them out one after the other and how he bonds with the triplets and Webby by fighting the dragon.
In the original, Scrooge said that the triplets' propensity to mischief and trouble reminded him of his youth, which later ended with them fighting off the Beagle Boys together in a river of chocolate that would make the animated Willy Wonka blush. In both cases, their youthful and pretty reckless actions brought Scrooge out of his funk while teaming up to stop a dangerous foe.
The main difference is that the triplets are the ones in the original that find out about a treasure to find, while here, Scrooge already knows how to get to Atlantis and simply offers the kids to join him on another adventure while keeping it a secret from Donald. And this brings us to episode 2. This is the episode where we actually get to meet Scrooge's old nemesis, McMoneysack. I mean, Glomgold. Getting used to English names is always hard when you grew up with another dub.
Same here.
Glomgold again fulfills his role as Scrooge's foal, though he seemingly gained a few pounds. Now I heard people saying that this version is much more ruthless than the original, as he was perfectly fine with killing Scrooge and his family. I can't really agree with that sentiment, as he was about to blow them up with dynamite in the second episode of the original. That being said, it is a bit more obvious here with his employee video, even admitting that they are stealing ideas from their competition. I read one theory though that was quite interesting. Glomgold makes a big deal out of the fact that he's more Scottish than Scrooge in this version. In the comics, Glomgold is actually from Africa, and there are theories that he is only pretending to be Scottish in this reboot, as he is just copying Scrooge. Now we have to wait and see if that is true, but I think it is a quite interesting thought.
Speaking of changes, Glumgold seems to be much more squashed than in the original, probably to distinguish him from Scrooge with something other than Scottish traditional and a beard. In fact, in the original series, there's even an episode where Glumgold frames Scrooge for theft by just dressing up as him, which also happens to be one of my personal favorite episodes. We also see some new henchmen for the series, which we can take that they will be recurring characters, including 2 Russian wolves with weird domes on their heads, and Gabby cosplaying as an Assassin's Creed character.
Didn't I say no MLP references? But that is disturbingly fitting.
And of course Donald as the oddball. Also, the internet would kill us if we don't mention it. A lot of people compare this girl to Roxanne from Goof Troop.
Well, maybe we're gonna see Goofy and Max at some point. After all, they made a Tailspin reference. Launchpad vs Baloo in a pilot contest is something that we need to see, guys. And that's actually another thing worth mentioning. In this version of DuckTales, I could see a crossover actually happening. The original version of DuckTales featured mostly ducks, obviously, and the so-called dog face. You know, these characters that look mostly human with skin color and so on, but for some odd reason had the nose and maybe ears of a dog.
Yeah, personally I wasn't a big fan of the fact that the DuckTales world consists of ducks, the so-called generic dog faces, and only occasionally you stumble upon a new species, like a pig, or a non-specific sharp-beaked bird like Phantom's girlfriend, Gendra. This version of this world seems much more complete.
And with complete, he means it went full furry. Now we have Anthrowolves, so pretty much everything is fair game and suddenly a character like Baloo from Tailspin would fit into this world.
So let's talk about the action, which is pretty intense. Not only did we have a ghost pirate and a dragon, but later we also get a giant squid, a living typhoon, and merman, who might be another reference to the original series. There they also found Atlantis, only here instead of making it fly, it's upside down, which makes some traps less efficient than others. Still, a snake pit can also double as a snake dropshot, I guess.
How are those snakes still alive?
I thought I told you not to question death traps made by ancient primitive civilizations. After all, we survived a plane crash that was too epic for our budget.
Ah, okay. But since when do we have a budget? In any case, one thing I also noticed is that magic and other fantastic elements are much more common in this reboot. I mean, sure, there was a lot of that in the original as well, but now it seems to get much more focus. Not that I mind, just an observation, which also boosts those Gravity Falls comparisons.
Well, there's never too little Gravity Falls references. Speaking of which, let's finish this by talking about the show's comedy and Easter eggs. Which of the latter there's in abundance. From the giant sign coin, to the magic lamp, to the aforementioned merman and references to the comics. All of these are a great treat for the longtime fans and something for the newcomers to learn about. The comedy itself is also something much more sophisticated than just old jokes, but now they have smartphones. It's much more the clashing between the old, which is represented by Scrooge, and the new, which is represented by the kids. We have dry humor from Mrs. Bickley, and the over-the-top reactions from Donald and Glumgold. The common saying is that the key to comedy is time. I'd like to add to this that great comedy also needs the unexpected as well as a good blend of different pieces to stay fresh. To be constantly on the move and making unexpected turns and maneuvers, and this show gets it. There's plenty of humor to satisfy anyone's liking, and even gain them the kind of humor that they might not see that often.
That's pretty much it. Most jokes are about character interactions. So far, no joke seems like it will be dated in 20 years, giving the show a timeless feel like the original has. Just let's hope that the rest of the series follows suit in this regard. That being said, there are a lot of small Easter eggs that you will only get if you've watched the original or other Disney afternoon shows, but they are never the focus of any given scene, so they don't distract and you can enjoy the show even if you never heard about DuckTales before. And with that being said, it's time to wrap things up.
As much as a cheap shot it is, I believe the nostalgia critic said it best. DuckTales, ooh freaking who. This is one of the closest to perfect reboots I have ever seen. It takes the best elements of the source material, or in this case, source materials, and improves on the lacking as well as introduce modern concepts to this world without throwing them in your face. I've heard some people complain that this show would have been even better with traditional animation or without celebrity voice actors, but here's the thing. As much as you cannot ignore that the times have changed inside the story world, they also change in the real world. And digital animation is a way for the studio to make their shows more efficient without dropping in quality or going over budget. Not to mention, I tried looking up details on the production, but while I couldn't find definite information, I don't believe this to be a flash animation. If anything, from my own experience, it's either made in Toon Boom or a similar program, which means that while it's still vectors, it's also hand-drawn animation, making it a good compromise. Same can be said about the voice actors, especially just after the pilot. You need to give them a chance to find themselves. Meanwhile, this show is extremely enjoyable, has action and comedy, and above all other, it draws you in.
Now this is how you reboot a show. This pilot features the perfect mix of old and new. I was a bit skeptical about the new art style, but I grew to like it. The comedy is spot on and they captured the heart of the original. If the rest of the show is like this, I have a new favorite cartoon. It is really hard to think of any negatives. I mean, I could complain that Huey, Dewey and Louie sounds too old like everyone else, but frankly that doesn't bother me. And David Tennant sounds like the perfect Scrooge. I want more. Also, I'm calling it now, Magica da Spell will be the villain of the first season finale.
I don't disagree. I just hope she has an Italian accent this time.
But what about you? What are your thoughts on this reboot?
Let us know in the comments.
I am Tricky Fox.
And I'm Grey, the Grey Cat Silvermane. The gender cat of Duckburg. For the time being.
Stay foxy, everyone.
Sly as a fox, you got me under your spell. But you know I'll never tell that I know you know so well. Some